Okay, moving on to unfinished business. Would someone like to move 10A1?
I'd like to move Resolution 2017-243, resolution directing staff to apply for a groundwater appropriations permit from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources conforming to a reduced groundwater pumping scenario, and further directing staff to organize a process of amending the Nokomis-Hiawatha Regional Park Master Plan to accommodate changes to the Hiawatha Golf Course property made necessary by the reduced groundwater pumping scenario.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'd like to ask the superintendent to provide an introduction to this since she wasn't here last time to do that.
Thank you, Acting President Irwin. And I apologize I wasn't here last week to help, or the last board meeting to help with the conversation that you were having. So following the passage of this resolution, I had several conversations with Senator Hayden where he shared with me concerns from some of his constituents around the action that the board took based on staff's recommendation. And in hearing the concerns with them from him, we actually convened a meeting with the DNR and Senator Hayden, Senator Champion, Peter McLaughlin, to talk through whether there were some alternative ways by which we could approach addressing the issues at Hiawatha Golf Course. And so what we were able to do is work through with the DNR where we are going to go through a process of applying for an appropriations permit at the ground level pumping that we are doing right now, recognizing that we are going to be working through a process to look at alternatives for the site, understanding that we have some significant groundwater pumping issues. And in doing so, we also need to submit to the DNR a safety plan because one of the big concerns the DNR has is if we have significant flooding, the safety of people on that property. And so we have to have a safety operations plan, which we will submit to the DNR at the same time we apply for this permit. And then thirdly, that we will also lay out a plan for going through the process to look at alternatives for the site, of which you have as a P&C item a staff recommended process to go through that. And that the DNR would work with us and that we would also provide annual reports to the DNR because we all understand that this is probably going to take us 2 to 3 years to even work through this process, come up with alternatives, finish any other study work we need to do. And then even when we have a plan that this board would adopt, we have to come up with funding. And so I think Senator Hayden, Senator Champion, the DNR all recognize that we're probably looking at at least a 5-year process to go through all of that, get the funding that we need to actually implement the changes we need, but that we have to put things in place to demonstrate we're going through this process. And so the resolution that is before you, the modified resolution, lays out that change, which is applying for a groundwater permit at the level that we're pumping right now, and that we would not change the golf course or mitigate the golf course differently than as an 18-hole golf course until the board adopted a master plan and implementation was going in place to actually implement any changes there. So that's what you have before you.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent. Questions? I saw Commissioner Walensky first.
Is this a temporary permit, like for 5 years, or is this?
It would be a temporary permit. One of the issues we're working through, we talked about when we were in the meeting with the DNR, is they have limits based on law how long they can issue a temporary permit. We're still working through that. They do not believe they have the ability to give us a 5-year temporary permit. They may be able to give us one 1-year or 2-year permit, but what we would do as part of that permit issuance is that they would say, you know, whatever time period they could give us a permit for, it would also be saying that we would also agree to extend it as long as you are making progress and on moving forward with this project.
Thank you.
Commissioner Forney.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Miller. I think that all of us were a bit befuddled at the last meeting when it came before us, and having that clarity, I think, is helpful not only for myself, but helpful for the community. The community, I think, hasn't embraced all of the issues here, and hopefully this way of approaching things is better. And I particularly also want to thank the elected officials for their outreach and making this happen. So thank you, and I will be voting for this.
Commissioner
Superintendent.
Forney and Acting President Irwin, I think one of the things that's really important that I did not articulate earlier is the concerns that we heard that I really took to heart was that while we recognize that there are significant pumping issues, we don't have a long-term solution. And so people felt like they wanted to understand what our long-term solution was. So instead of reducing the pumping right away, we said, hey, let's hold off on that while we work through this process, and then when we have a solution that's been a community engaged solution, then at that point we go and get the reduced pumping permit.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Forney. Commissioner Bourne.
Thank you, Vice President. I want to thank staff for going back and doing some additional clarity on this resolution. I spoke with Senator Hayden this afternoon, and he feels confident in the work that that was done in this resolution, that it kind of meets that commitment that we made to work together. I do still have just kind of one process question, because a lot of the language does still say that the 18-hole golf course is in effect going away, but it's a matter of time. And if I'm reading that language kind of compared to the resolves, it seems to me like we might not be limited to the 242 versus 94 anymore, that we're kind of reopening that spectrum in between in the community engagement process. So we're looking to reduce pumping. We will be looking at other scenarios that will and can reduce pumping, but perhaps not down to that 94 level. Am I understanding that right?
Commissioner Bourne, you raise a really good point. As I was working through this, I was only addressing the resolve clause. I did not address the whereases, because when you pass a board action, it's really the resolve clause that give the definition of what you can and cannot do. But I recognize that by not addressing some of the whereases, it may be confusing. But the intent is that the DNR has been clear about the level that we need to get down to, but there may, I don't know, we don't know what those alternatives will be. Again, I don't think I think the resolve clause are very clear in terms of honoring what we agreed to. And again, I didn't touch the whereas clauses. I can't give you an answer about what those alternatives are going to look like, because we just don't know at this point.
Right. So I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable voting for this, and I'm comfortable with the idea that we're going to be looking at all options. That also one of those options is preservation of an 18-hole. One of those options is not. And there's a whole spectrum in between. And I just wanted to get that. I don't know if I don't want to wordsmith the whereases, because I think what happened last time was it ended up getting pulled, and I think some people are looking for this clarification, but I just wanted it on record that we still have a lot of work to do, and there hasn't been a decision made, and that this resolution extends that process for folks. So I will be supporting this as well.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of this item say aye.
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 Against?
No.
That item passes.